My parents hated me when I ran away from them and opened my own gym. They robbed and vandalized it out of envy that I had achieved something in life. I don't even know where to begin. I guess, like most people, I didn't choose my family. I was born into chaos. A chaos so deep and ingrained in the walls of our house, it felt like breathing air laced with poison. My parents, they were monsters. I know how that sounds, like something out of a bad movie, but it's the truth. They didn't wear masks or have fangs, but they were experts in cruelty, and they found every possible way to make my life hell. For as long as I can remember, I was the punching bag, both literally and figuratively. My father was a controlling brute, a man with a booming voice who could silence a room with a single word. He wasn't physically imposing, short, stocky, with graying hair, but it was the way he carried himself, the coldness in his eyes, that made everyone shrink in his presence. He didn't hit me often. No, he preferred the more covert forms of abuse, the psychological games, the way he'd undermine every achievement and mock every failure. "You're not worth anything, you know that?" he'd say with a twisted smile. "You'll never be more than the dirt under my shoes." My mother wasn't any better. If my father was the storm, my mother was the constant drizzle that soaked through every layer, making sure you never stayed dry. She was manipulative, always twisting the truth to her advantage. To the outside world, she was a victim, a frail, nervous woman trapped in an unhappy marriage. But behind closed doors, she'd sit and watch as my father tore me apart, never once stepping in to protect me. Sometimes, she'd even encourage it, with a soft, "He needs to learn his place." There wasn't a single moment of safety in that house. My room became my refuge, but even then, it wasn't enough. I could hear them yelling, the constant accusations, the slamming of doors, and worst of all, the moments of complete silence. Silence was dangerous. It meant they were scheming, planning their next attack, or worse, finding a new way to make me feel even smaller. School was no better. I was always the kid who kept his head down, trying to avoid attention. I figured out early on that people could sense weakness. The other kids picked up on it too. I was always the quiet one, the one who didn't quite fit in. My clothes were never right. We didn't have much money, or at least that's what they told me. I wore hand-me-downs from cousins I'd never even met, clothes that never quite fit, always a little too big or too small. I remember the first day of school vividly. I thought maybe, just maybe, school would be different. I had dreams, you know? I thought I'd find friends, escape for a few hours from the nightmare that was my home. But from the moment I stepped off the bus, it was clear I wasn't going to get a fresh start. The kids sneered at me, whispered behind my back, and the teachers, well, they didn't care. I was just another face in the sea of students. I became invisible. That's how I survived. I learned to blend into the background, to never make waves. I became the kid who was always in the back of the room, never raising his hand, never speaking unless spoken to. It worked for a while. I slipped under the radar, unnoticed by both the bullies and the teachers. But it didn't last. There was this one kid, Tyler. He was everything I wasn't. Popular, outgoing, the kind of kid who had it all. He took one look at me and decided I was his new project. Every day, he'd find some new way to humiliate me. Whether it was tripping me in the hallway or making jokes about my clothes, he never let up. I tried to avoid him, but it was like he had a radar for misery. He always found me, always had something cruel to say. My parents didn't care. When I told my mother about Tyler, she just sighed and said, "Boys will be boys." My father? He laughed. "Maybe if you weren't such a weakling, they'd leave you alone." I started to believe them. Maybe I was the problem. Maybe if I was stronger, better, everything would be different. By the time I got to high school, I had perfected the art of disappearing. I went to classes, did my homework, and kept my head down. But inside, I was screaming. I wanted out. I wanted to run, to leave everything behind and start over. But I had no idea how. College became my only hope, my ticket out of that house and away from the hell that had become my life. I applied to every school I could, not caring where they were or what they offered. I just needed an escape. When the acceptance letters started coming in, I couldn't believe it. I had options. For the first time in my life, I had choices. But Of course, my parents had to ruin that, too. "You'll go to the community college," my father said, his voice dripping with disdain. "We're not paying for you to go live in some dorm and waste our money." I couldn't breathe. The walls were closing in. I had done everything I was supposed to do, and they were still going to trap me. I thought about giving up, about just accepting my fate and living out the rest of my life under their thumb. But then I realized something. I didn't need them. I didn't need their approval, their money, or their permission. I could do this on my own. So, I left. It wasn't some dramatic escape in the middle of the night. No, I waited until the day after my high school graduation. I packed up the few things I had, got into my beat-up car, and drove away. I didn't say goodbye. They didn't even notice I was gone. The city was supposed to be my fresh start. I found a small apartment, nothing fancy, just a one-bedroom with creaky floors and thin walls. But it was mine. I paid for it with my own money from a part-time job I picked up at a diner. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Enough to keep me afloat while I figured out what to do next. College was different. I thought it would be this magical place where everything would change, but it wasn't. I was still me, still carrying the weight of everything that had happened. But at least I was free. No more constant fear, no more walking on eggshells around my parents. I could finally breathe, even if that breath felt heavy and uncertain. University wasn't easy. I had no support system, no one to fall back on. While other kids were calling home for help with tuition or textbooks, I was scraping by on student loans and whatever I could save for my job. The classes were harder than I expected, and I quickly realized I was behind. I didn't have the same foundation as everyone else. While they had spent their high school years preparing for this, I had spent mine trying to survive. But I worked hard. I studied every night, stayed up until the early hours of the morning, determined to make it. I couldn't fail. If I failed, I had nothing. So, I kept going, even when it felt impossible. Even when it felt like I was drowning, I forced myself to keep pushing forward. Then, something strange happened. I started to succeed. Slowly, bit by bit, I was getting better. My grades improved, and for the first time in my life, I wasn't just invisible. I was doing well. People started to notice. Professors praised my work, classmates asked to study with me, and for once, I felt like I belonged somewhere. But, of course, life wasn't done throwing curveballs at me. Just when things started to look up, my father called. I hadn't spoken to him in months, not since I left. But there he was, on the other end of the line, his voice as cold as ever. "We need you to come back." I laughed. Actually laughed. The idea of going back to that house, to that life, after everything I had fought for, it was absurd. But he wasn't joking. "My mother was sick," he said. "She needed help. And despite everything, despite all the pain they had caused me, there was a part of me that still felt responsible, that still felt like I owed them something." I didn't go. I couldn't. If I went back, I knew I'd never leave again. Graduation came faster than I expected. It was a blur of exams, late-night study sessions, and last-minute papers. But I made it. I walked across that stage, took my diploma, and for the first time in my life, I felt proud. Not because of the piece of paper in my hand, but because I had done it. I had escaped. I had survived. But even as I moved my tassel from one side to the other, I couldn't shake the feeling that it wasn't over, that I hadn't truly escaped. The shadows of my past still lingered, following me wherever I went. I could change cities, change schools, change everything, but they were always there, lurking in the background. So here I am, in a new city, with a degree in hand and no idea what to do next. I thought getting away would be enough. I thought leaving that house would set me free. But I'm starting to realize that freedom isn't as simple as running away. It's something you have to fight for, every single day. I don't know what the future holds, but I know one thing for sure. I'm not going back. Not ever. I'll figure it out, one step at a time. But I'm done being their victim. I'm done being invisible. It's time to start living for me. After graduating, I was faced with a gaping void of uncertainty. It's strange. I had spent my entire life trying to escape, and when I finally did, the freedom felt unsettling. For the first time in my life, no one was telling me what to do or how to live. It was exhilarating but terrifying at the same time. With my degree in hand, I had no intention of returning to the hell I had fled. I didn't have a lot of money, and my student loans were already beginning to pile up, but I was determined not to let that hold me back. I had a few job offers, none of which were glamorous, but they were better than nothing. So, I took one, a job as a fitness consultant for a small, struggling gym on the outskirts of the city. It wasn't what I had envisioned for myself, but it was a start. The gym wasn't much when I first started. It was in a rundown building, with outdated equipment and a client base that seemed to dwindle by the day. The owner, a man named Frank, was nearing retirement and was barely hanging on. He'd been in the business for over 30 years, and while he knew how to run a gym, he had no idea how to market it or bring in new clients. On my first day, I walked into a nearly empty gym. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the cracked floors and rusty weights. The place reeked of sweat and desperation, and I knew I had my work cut out for me. But something about the challenge excited me. It wasn't just a job, it was an opportunity. Frank wasn't particularly interested in hearing my ideas. He was set in his ways and didn't believe in social media or advertising. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I started small, updating the gym's website, creating a Facebook page, and posting regular updates. I knew that to get people in the door, we had to make the gym feel alive, like it was part of the community. I spent every spare moment coming up with new ideas, hosting free fitness classes in the park, running promotions for local businesses, and organizing charity events. Slowly but surely, people started to trickle in. It wasn't much at first, just a few new members here and there, but it was progress. I also started to apply some of the things I had learned in college. My degree wasn't in business, but I had taken a few courses that gave me a solid foundation in marketing and management. I started to see the gym as more than just a job. It was a puzzle, and I was determined to figure it out. As the gym started to gain traction, I began to take on more responsibilities. Frank, who had initially been skeptical of my ideas, started to trust me more. He saw the numbers improving, and for the first time in years, the gym was turning a profit. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the doors open. After about a year, Frank decided to retire. He had been talking about it for a while, but I hadn't expected him to actually follow through. One day, he called me into his office and told me that he was done. "I'm too old for this," he said, leaning back in his chair with a sigh. "The gym's in better shape now than it's been in years, and that's thanks to you. I want to sell it, and I think you should buy it." I was stunned. Buy the gym? Me? I had never even considered the possibility. I was barely scraping by as it was. There was no way I could afford to buy a business. But Frank wasn't asking for much. He didn't need the money. He just wanted to make sure the gym was in good hands. "I'll give you a deal," he said, grinning. "I know you don't have a lot of cash, so we'll set up a payment plan. You can pay me back over the next few years. But you've got to promise me one thing. Keep this place alive." I didn't need to think twice. I jumped at the opportunity. It wasn't going to be easy, but I knew I could do it. I had already proven to myself that I could turn things around, and now I had the chance to make something of my own. The next few years were a blur of hard work and sleepless nights. Owning a business was a lot different than working for one. I was responsible for everything: the bills, the marketing, the staff, and the clients. I had to learn on the fly, but I wasn't afraid of hard work. If anything, I thrived on it. The gym was my baby, and I was determined to make it a success. I poured everything I had into it, working 12-hour days and barely taking a day off. I upgraded the equipment, repainted the walls, and gave the whole place a much-needed facelift. I hired a few new trainers, people who were as passionate about fitness as I was, and together, we started building a community. The gym wasn't just a place to work out. It became a hub for people who wanted to improve their lives. One of the new trainers I hired was a guy named Jordan. He was a bit younger than me, fresh out of college, but he had an energy about him that I liked. He was great with people, always cracking jokes and keeping things light. He quickly became one of the most popular trainers at the gym, and his classes were always packed. Jordan and I became fast friends. We had a lot in common. Both of us had grown up in tough situations, and we had a shared determination to make something of ourselves. We spent a lot of late nights after the gym closed, talking about our plans for the future. Jordan had big dreams. He wanted to open his own gym someday, but for now, he was happy to help me build mine. The gym continued to grow. Word of mouth spread, and soon we were getting new members every week. I started to invest more in advertising, running Facebook and Instagram ads, partnering with local businesses, and even sponsoring a few community events. The results were incredible. Within a year, we had doubled our membership, and I was able to hire more staff and expand the gym even further. But with success came challenges. As the gym grew, so did the competition. Other gyms started popping up in the area, trying to capitalize on the fitness trend that was sweeping the city. Some of them were big chains with deep pockets, and I knew I couldn't compete with their marketing budgets or fancy equipment. But I had something they didn't: a loyal community. People didn't come to my gym because of the equipment or the amenities. They came because they felt like they belonged. And then, the first shocking event that changed everything happened. I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a Friday evening, and the gym was packed. Jordan was teaching a class in the back, and I was at the front desk, talking to a few members. That's when I heard the crash. It was loud, like something heavy had fallen, followed by the sound of people screaming. My heart dropped, and I ran toward the noise. When I got to the back of the gym, I saw Jordan lying on the floor, unconscious. One of the large weight machines had collapsed, and it had landed right on top of him. There was blood everywhere. The next few minutes were a blur. Someone called 911, and we did everything we could to help Jordan until the paramedics arrived. But it didn't look good. His leg was crushed, and he had a deep gash on his head. I stood there, helpless, as they loaded him into the ambulance and rushed him to the hospital. I followed the ambulance to the hospital, my mind racing. How could this happen? The equipment was brand new. We had just upgraded everything a few months ago. I had made sure that everything was installed correctly, that it was safe. But something had gone horribly wrong. Jordan was in surgery for hours. I sat in the waiting room, my stomach in knots, praying that he would be okay. Finally, a doctor came out and told me that he was stable, but his injuries were severe. He had a traumatic brain injury, and his leg was so badly damaged that they weren't sure if he would ever walk again, let alone train. The guilt was overwhelming. I blamed myself for what happened. If I had checked the equipment more carefully, if I had been more diligent, maybe this could have been avoided. I couldn't shake the feeling that I had failed him. The next few weeks were some of the hardest of my life. The gym kept running, but it wasn't the same without Jordan. Members were shaken by the accident, and some of them left, worried that the gym wasn't safe. I did everything I could to reassure them, bringing in inspectors to check every piece of equipment and making sure everything was up to code. But the damage was done. Jordan, thankfully, pulled through. But he wasn't the same. His leg would never fully heal, and he had to undergo months of physical therapy. The doctors said he might walk again, but he would never be able to train like he used to. It broke my heart to see him like that. This guy who had been so full of life, so passionate about fitness, reduced to a shell of himself. I visited him every day in the hospital, and we talked about the gym, about life, about everything. He told me not to blame myself, that it wasn't my fault, but I couldn't shake the guilt. I promised him that I would keep the gym going, that I would make it the best in the city, not just for me, but for him. So that's what I did. I threw myself into the gym with a renewed sense of purpose. I wasn't just building it for me anymore. I was building it for Jordan, for all the people who had believed in me from the beginning. I worked harder than ever, investing in new equipment, hiring more staff, and expanding the gym even further. Eventually, the gym became something I never could have imagined. It wasn't just a small neighborhood gym anymore. It was a destination. People came from all over the city to work out with us, to be part of the community we had built. We won awards, we were featured in magazines, and soon enough, we were the top gym in the city. But success has its price. The more the gym grew, the more I felt the pressure. I was constantly working, constantly trying to stay ahead of the competition. I barely had time for myself anymore. I started to wonder if this was really what I wanted. Sure, the money was good, and the recognition was great, but I was losing myself in the process. And then came the second major event that changed everything. One night, after the gym had closed, I got a call from one of the trainers. There had been a break-in. I rushed to the gym, my heart pounding, wondering what I would find. When I got there, The place was trashed. Equipment was overturned, mirrors were shattered, and the front desk had been smashed to pieces. But it wasn't just the damage that shocked me. Someone had spray-painted the walls with threats. "You'll never make it. We'll destroy you. And this is just the beginning," were scrawled in red across the walls. I had no idea who could have done this. I had never made any enemies, at least not that I knew of. But as I stood there, staring at the destruction, I realized that someone was out to get me. I didn't sleep the night of the break-in. How could I? The gym, my sanctuary, my life's work, had been violated. The images of shattered mirrors, overturned equipment, and those hateful words scrawled on the walls in red spray paint kept flashing through my mind. It wasn't just a random act of vandalism. The messages made it clear this was personal. Someone wanted to destroy me, and I had no idea who or why. The police arrived, took their notes, asked their questions, but I could see the disinterest in their eyes. To them, it was just another case of vandalism in a big city. They weren't going to put in the effort needed to find out who was behind it, and I wasn't about to sit around and wait for them to add my case to the bottom of a pile of other unsolved crimes. I needed answers. I needed justice. That's when I decided to hire a private detective. It wasn't hard to find one, but it was hard to trust one. I didn't want just anyone working on this. Whoever had done this clearly had a grudge, and I needed someone who could dig deep and get to the bottom of it. After a lot of research and recommendations, I found someone who seemed perfect for the job, Greg Turner. He came highly recommended, known for his tenacity and ability to uncover even the most well-buried secrets. His reputation spoke for itself, and after a long conversation, I knew he was the right man for the job. Greg was an older guy, maybe in his late 40s, with salt and pepper hair and a sharp look in his eyes. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. When we met in his dimly lit office, surrounded by old case files and dusty books, he cut right to the chase. "Vandalism, huh? Sounds personal from what you've described," he said, tapping a finger on his notepad. "Who have you pissed off lately?" I laughed bitterly. "I don't know. That's why I'm here. I run a gym. I'm not exactly in the business of making enemies." Greg raised an eyebrow. "You'd be surprised, kid. In my line of work, I've seen people get stabbed over a parking spot. No grudge is too small." Over the next few weeks, Greg dove into the case. He started by talking to the employees, the gym members, and anyone who had been around the night of the break-in. He pulled security footage, checked out local surveillance cameras, and even went through my business records to see if anyone I'd recently fired or had issues with could be responsible. Nothing. Whoever did this knew how to cover their tracks. But Greg wasn't someone who gave up easily. He was relentless. Every few days, he'd call me with updates, each one more frustrating than the last. He tracked down a few leads, but they all turned out to be dead ends. He even looked into the competition. Other gyms that might want to see mine fail, but nothing concrete came up. Weeks turned into months, and I started to lose hope. The gym was up and running again. I had fixed the damage, replaced the broken equipment, and repainted the walls. But the fear lingered. The sense of being watched, of not knowing who was lurking in the shadows, gnawed at me. I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever had done this wasn't finished. Then, one day, everything changed. Greg called me into his office, and this time, he had something big. I could hear the excitement in his voice when he told me to come over. When I arrived, he didn't waste any time. "I've got something for you. And you're not gonna like it," he said, sliding a manila folder across his desk. My heart raced as I opened the folder. Inside were photographs, documents, and notes from Greg's investigation. And there, staring back at me, were the last faces I ever expected to see. My parents. I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. This can't be right," I stammered, looking up at Greg in disbelief. "It's right," Greg said, his voice calm but firm. "I didn't believe it at first either, but all the evidence points to them. Your parents are behind the break-in." I sat back in the chair, my mind spinning. My parents? The people I had spent my whole life trying to escape? The people who had tormented me, belittled me, and made me feel worthless for years. They were the ones who tried to destroy my gym? Greg explained everything. He had started digging into my family background after all the other leads went cold. It was a shot in the dark, but something didn't sit right with him about my past. When he looked into my parents' financial records, he found that they were in deep debt. Gambling, unpaid loans, and shady business deals. They were desperate for money. And then, he uncovered something even more shocking. My parents had been keeping tabs on me since I left home. They knew about the gym, about my success, and they hated it. I had escaped their control, and instead of failing like they always told me I would, I had built something for myself. That was too much for them to handle. They wanted to ruin me, to take away the one thing I had worked so hard for. Greg had tracked down phone records, emails, and even found a witness who had seen my father near the gym the night of the break-in. It all added up. I was furious. I felt sick. After everything they had put me through, they weren't done with me. Even from a distance, they were still trying to tear me down. I wanted to confront them right away, to drive to their house and scream in their faces. But Greg advised against it. "We need to do this the right way," he said. "If you confront them now, they'll deny everything, and we'll lose our chance to hold them accountable." So, instead, we went to the police with the evidence. Greg had compiled a rock-solid case, and with his connections and the evidence we had, the police took it seriously. They opened an investigation, and within a few weeks, my parents were arrested. The news hit me like a ton of bricks. Seeing their mugshots on the news, hearing the reports of their arrest, it was surreal. Part of me wanted to feel vindicated, but another part of me just felt empty. These were the people who raised me, who were supposed to protect and care for me, and they had betrayed me in the worst possible way. But the nightmare wasn't over yet. I still had to face them in court. The lawsuit was messy. My parents, of course, denied everything at first. They claimed the evidence was fabricated, that they had nothing to do with the break-in. But Greg's investigation was airtight. He had the phone records, the emails, the witness statements. It was all there, laid out in black and white. My father tried to play the victim in court, saying that he and my mother had been wronged, that I had abandoned them, and they were just trying to reconnect with me. It was disgusting. I couldn't believe the lengths they were willing to go to, the lies they were willing to tell, just to save themselves. The trial dragged on for months. My parents hired a high-priced lawyer who tried every trick in the book to get them off. But in the end, the truth was undeniable. The jury found them guilty of conspiracy to commit vandalism and destruction of property, and they were ordered to pay restitution for the damage they had caused to the gym. It wasn't just the money. It was the fact that, for once, they were being held accountable. For once, they couldn't escape the consequences of their actions. When the verdict was read, my parents didn't even look at me. They stared straight ahead, stone-faced, as if I didn't exist. I thought maybe, just maybe, they would show some sign of remorse, some indication that they understood the gravity of what they had done. But there was nothing. They didn't care. They never had. After the trial, I walked out of the courthouse feeling numb. I had won, but it didn't feel like a victory. There was no satisfaction in seeing my parents punished. If anything, I felt more alone than ever. I had finally cut the last remaining ties to my past, and now I was truly on my own. The money they were ordered to pay didn't matter to me. I didn't need it. The gym was doing fine, and I had already rebuilt what they had tried to destroy. But knowing that they had to face the consequences, that was what mattered. In the months that followed, I threw myself back into the gym. I expanded, opening a second location in a neighboring city. I hired more trainers, invested in new equipment, and started offering more classes. The gym was thriving, and I was busier than ever. But no matter how much success I achieved, the scars of what had happened remained. I tried to bury the pain, to focus on the future, but there were nights when the weight of everything would hit me all at once. I had built this incredible life for myself, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was missing. I started going to therapy, something I had resisted for years. I didn't want to deal with the past, didn't want to relive the trauma of my childhood. But after everything that had happened with my parents, I knew I needed help. I couldn't keep carrying this burden on my own. Therapy was hard at first. I didn't want to open up, didn't want to talk about the pain and the anger that had been simmering inside me for so long. But over time, I started to heal. I started to understand that what my parents had done to me wasn't my fault, that I didn't deserve the abuse they had inflicted on me. I also realized that my success wasn't just about proving them wrong. For so long, I had been driven by the need to escape, to build something that would show them I wasn't the failure they always said I was. But now, I wanted to build something for myself, something that made me happy, something that fulfilled me. And that's exactly what I did. A year after the trial, I opened my third gym. It was the biggest one yet, with state-of-the-art equipment, a juice bar, and even a small spa. It was a dream come true, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I had truly made it. Not because of the money or the success, but because I had built something that was mine, something that no one could take away from me. My parents never paid the full amount they owed. They tried to appeal the verdict, dragging out the legal process for as long as they could. But in the end, it didn't matter. I had moved on. I had built a life for myself that was stronger than anything they could destroy. Now, as I sit here writing this, I feel a sense of peace that I never thought I'd have. My gym is thriving, my life is full, and I've surrounded myself with people who care about me, people who support me, not tear me down. The road to get here wasn't easy. It was filled with pain, betrayal, and loss. But I made it. I survived. And for the first time in my life, I feel free.